Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Jewish Gen Talk. We are so glad that you're here. We will get started in about a minute. Please post in the chat where you are in the world, where you're logging in from. We have people who registered from the United States, and Israel, and Canada, Australia, Europe. So please let us know where you're from, then we'll get started shortly. Karen, Janet, Lynn, you can see in the chat if you recognize anybody. People from Southern California, London, Northern Ireland. Elias Savata, always good to see you. Bonnie Burns, who is now in Boynton Beach, Florida. Nice to see you. Charlene in San Francisco Bay Area. Laney in Tucson, Arizona. Ken Cutler in Parkland, Florida. Thanks for being with us. We have iPhone from Melbourne, Australia. We're so glad that you're with us. Welcome. We have Ellen in Denver, Colorado, and Emmanuel in Ramat Gan in Israel. We have Simon in Toronto. We have Richard in Mumbai in India. Thank you for being with us today. We have Scott Mandel in St. Petersburg, Florida. We have Eileen Millman in New York City, not as exotic as Mumbai in India, but we're so glad that you're here with us. Julie in Amsterdam, Mark in Berlin. For everyone who's just logging in, we are about to get started. Please let us know in the chat where you are from, where you're logging in from. We'll get started soon. And we have people in Abby in Westchester County, New York, Gabby in Germany, Adrian in London, Sarah in Boston, Lynn Hill, you're here in Brooklyn. Excellent. So glad that you're with us. We have Alexander Feller in Chicago. Welcome. We have Ethan Starr in Washington, D.C., Jill in North Florida, and Liz in Sacramento, California, Susan Weingarten in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being with us. Leslie Wacht, a participant in our Neshama program this year in Wisconsin. Welcome, Leslie. So good to see you. Renee Garbus, also a previous Neshama participant. So nice to see you. And we have Gail Ziegler in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are going to get started. There are people from all over the world. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Avram Grohl, and I oversee Jewish Gen, which is the genealogical research division of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust based in New York City. Today's talk is part of our ongoing Jewish Gen Talk series of educational webinars. Today we are joined by Karen Franklin, Janet Eisenberg, and Lynn Hill, who are going to be talking about the efforts to restitute looted books to heirs of original owners. The session is being recorded, but you, as always, are encouraged to take notes. There is a copy of the database that has been promoted, and that will be posted in the chat and also sent out following the webinar. If you'd like to ask any questions, please post them in the Q&A section, not in the chat, and we will try to go through them at the end. If we're not able to get to one of the questions, then our speakers have graciously offered to follow up with anybody after the webinar, and you'll be able to connect with them via email. We will put on the closed captions, and we will also be posting the recording of the session on the Jewish Gen YouTube channel. We will be sending out a link following the webinar. And again, since you are registered, you will have advanced access before we post it for the community at large. Just a little bit about our speakers, all of whom are well known in the Jewish genealogical community. Karen Franklin is currently the head of the Peter and Mary Calico Jewish Genealogy Research Center here at the museum. It's Jewish Gen's physical presence where people can walk in and connect with a genealogist on staff. Janet Eisenberg, also been doing genealogy for 50 plus years, has an extensive background and expertise in German genealogy. Lynn Hill, a volunteer, an expert in genealogy, a retired hospital administrator who has an academic background. So we are joined by people who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience and are doing inspirational work in trying to find the heirs of the owners of these books. So we're so glad that you're with us. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Karen, who will lead the presentation.
Thank you very much, Avrami. In past talks, I've said that everyone who is in attendance is related to me, but with this large group from all over the world, while maybe technically true, I don't know all of you, and I'm thrilled that you are here today. I want to begin by thanking Avrami and Janet and Lynn. I have to say, all of this would not be possible without them. Janet has organized this entire enterprise and really made it happen and allowed us to grow in our ability to find the families. So thank you so much, Janet, in particular, and to all the volunteers. I think we'll begin so that can use the slides to tell the story. So let's see if I can share my screen here. Let's see. Oh, I'm not doing, hold on one second.
Click on slideshow on the right.
Slideshow on the right.
Just move over a little bit more.
That's
Or
the left.
under view, click under view, and then
View
click
slideshow. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Here we go. You can all see the properly?
You'll
Yes.
have to go up to the first slide, though.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Okay.
It's not showing
Let me
the slideshow
try
yet.
that again. Let's see. I'm just going to go through it. It's easier. Now you all get a view ahead of time.
I think your
So,
screen is frozen, so we're not seeing any of it.
Get a sense. There we go. So a little bit about the history of this of the books themselves. This project began in 2008 to identify the original owners of 10,000 books that were confiscated from the library of Julius Streicher, one of the most infamous Nazis. And these books were found in his collection at the end of the war.
Here, and
They
I'm going to
were
stop
hidden-
for a second. The screen is frozen, so we're not seeing. We're still seeing the display screen.
Okay.
Let me try to share mine instead.
Let's try one more time.
No,
And if
no,
it
we're
doesn't
good. We're
work,
good now, but just let's get it back into the view mode. Under
okay, so when I go to
view,
view slideshow, let's try this one, but it's still gonna,
there it's
okay,
going. Now
how's
it's
that
loading.
one?
No, it's coming up. It's coming up.
All
There it is.
right. So the person who coordinates this all is Leibel Rosenberg, who is heads the project in Nuremberg. He has been responsible for the return of over 900 books during this project. And they are currently available for you to peruse to see if there's a book that might have belonged to your family on JewishGen's Holocaust database as of yesterday. Thank you, Avraham Grohl. And there's also a spreadsheet that will be available, and Janet will explain that at the end of the talk. So it's only a third of these 10,000 that had some kind of identification to enable us to know who they belong to. But that being said, they weren't necessarily the last owners of the books, as you will see as we go. Now, I became interested in this project many years ago, and I worked on it for 10 years or so and stopped and put it aside. And this past fall, there was a talk by Stuart. Yes.
Karen, it looks like the screen is still not loading. Maybe
So
Janet can
let's
run the
let
slide.
Janet.
I'm
shall we
going
let
to share. I'm
try
going to
it?
share my screen instead. Okay.
Okay.
Let's stop sharing yours and I'll share mine. Give me a second. And get to the correct screen. Hold on.
So sorry for those technical details.
Yeah.
And I was having such a good time too.
No. But you know what? Before I share, let me make sure I'm in the right screen. I don't want to share 1,000 other things I have open.
I was kind of hoping everybody saw my children in the background, but I see it's only the slideshow itself. Oh, well.
Okay, I'm going to the correct screen and going into here. Okay. And going to slideshow view. Sorry about this, everybody.
So just to give you a little background as to how it's not necessarily the final owner, a book that I'm going to talk about, the owner, some of them, the owners died in the 19th century. So we don't know who actually owned the book between the end of the 19th century and the 1940s when the books ended up in Streicher's library.
Okay, Let me know if you're seeing this in a second.
We're
Coming up.
just seeing loading again. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so you're on the
Thank
slide,
you
right?
very much, Janet, and apologies. This is Leibel Rosenberg.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, next one. So I heard the lecture by Stuart Eisenstadt, and I decided that I wanted to continue the work I had done many years ago. And so we published an article in the Leo Baeck Institute newsletter, and as a result of that, a volunteer, Lynn Hill, contacted me and said she would be interested in assisting with the work. And then, Janet, I gave a talk at a Holocaust Scholars Conference in Texas shortly thereafter, and a graduate student walked up to me and said she would like to also assist us in the work, a non-Jewish graduate student who ended up bringing several other of her colleagues to also join our team. Next. So this is what the database looks like, the original database that was sent to us in alphabetical order. It can be organized in various ways, and you can see not all the families were German. They came from throughout Poland and actually all over Europe, all over the world. And that's how we started. However, Janet was able to reconfigure this list so that we added a column for which cases we had started on, which cases were solved, which books were returned. You'll notice that there's also the towns where the people came from, the birth dates of those last owners who could be identified. A great deal of work was done prior to our receiving this list, which is now over 700 individuals because some people owned more than one book. And it also gives their professions. You can see several are bookstore owners, so they went through the bookstores or dealers and thus have the little labels, the little book plates from those people. Now, one of the things that was not a surprise to us, but interesting to note, was that there weren't too many shoemakers on the list. Many were academics, teachers, scientists who had large libraries that had been looted. Now, today, as of yesterday, these books are also listed in our JewishGen Holocaust databases. So you can see there's a new list of books at the bottom of the different sources, and you can just go straight and put the name in to see if the book from your family is available. There's a description of the project, and we use just the first person on the list to show how you would search, and this is the search that comes up for that name. Okay. Now, the process that we used, because usually when you do your own work, you start from the current and try and go back. But of course, in this case, we're starting with the ancestors and trying to go down to the current generations. So we began finding that many of these families are available on trees on Ancestry and Genie. Of course, the person who posted the tree might not actually be able to identify the descendants, but that's where we started. And once any descendants or family members or people who could help us were identified, then we used, many of you are familiar with the tricks already, the Facebook and people finders and so on. Our European colleagues don't necessarily have the option of finding all of these names online because of the data protection laws. So we were able to help them out in many ways, research techniques that could not be available in Europe. And of course, if there were no descendants because the owners died in the Holocaust or didn't have children, we would start going sideways, where there are nieces and nephews and so on and so forth. This work, by the way, has become much more difficult even within the few months since we reignited our interest. And that's because people are less likely to answer the telephone. If they don't know a number, and they're more reticent because of anti-Semitism to believe in that this is really something that's in their best interest, that's really true. And I just have to give an example which just happened recently. I do a lot of this work, so I'm familiar with reticent people on the telephone. I do work for the Stuttgart Museum. I've worked on a number of cases for them. Of course, for this project with many outstanding inquiries, also private cases for attorneys, and people call me back and I don't remember where I had requested the information. So this gentleman called me back and told me his name. I said, "I'm really sorry, you're just going to have to help me, remind me which case this is for." And he said, "It was something that was looted that you called." I said, "Yeah, it's a book. I have to tell you, it's not really worth a lot." But he said, "Wait, I thought it was a painting." I mean, it was the guy from Stuttgart, and we actually had found him, and he was entitled to a major return. Anyway, a case study of Julius Brauvman. He was on the list. His last location that he was living was in Hirschberg in Germany. And next. And by using JewishGen's communities database, I was able to see, I already knew that family, the Brauvman family, but the Brauvman family I knew was from Oberalterheim and Unteralterheim. But sure enough, looking at this communities database, I could see that they were very close to Hirschberg. And so therefore I knew I had the right family. I also knew, one of the reasons I knew that family is that it's very close to me, my own community in Riverdale. Was a very important philanthropist, Ludwig Brauvman, and I actually know his daughter, Judy, very well. So I simply called her up, had her telephone number, and told her about the book, and she was thrilled. But the question was, exactly how was this Julius Brauvman related to Judy? And she simply called her aunt, who was 103 years old, and she was able to give that information. What's important about this case is not just what she could tell us, but what we could tell her, because her father had been interviewed by the Leo Baeck Institute, and there were details in that interview about his life as a child that she had not known. And that was not the only thing we were able to provide her about her family. Also, our Leibel Rosenberg had done a tremendous amount of research while looking for the books. And he had compiled also an entire biography for this Julius Brauvman and the family, and that became available to Judy. And then additionally was, of course, the listing, the original listing, confirming that he had been born in Unteralterheim, as I had suspected from the beginning. Next one. Additionally, what we learned was from seeing what kinds of books were owned by our ancestors, by these people, we're able to learn a little bit more about who they were from their books. In this case, Leibel sent me this wonderful photo. He said, you know, the same book that Judy's ancestor had owned was also owned by Kafka. And then he sent me this photo, and I'm thinking, gee, that doesn't look like Kafka at all. And I realized it was like, I think, I'll have to confirm this, it was Leibel himself as a child studying from the same book. Let's go past this one. I want to make sure there's time for everything. So I had mentioned that there were some book dealers whose books are represented on the list. And here was one of this Jacob Brandeis from Breslau. And he was easy to find because he was on Genie. But of course, as you know, just contacting a person on Genie doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to be back in touch and that you'll be able to identify the descendants. But I had some luck in Googling him because it seems there was another tree that also had his descendants. And in this case, if you look at the bottom line, Michael Barnea, who I guess had the name changed from Brandeis, I believe, he lives in Israel, and his email address was listed on the tree. So this was an easy one. In 10 minutes, I had to simply email Michael, and in fact, the book was restituted by Leibel, and he wrote a very beautiful message that I think also helps us understand the power and meaning of the ability to return this property to the descendants of the original owners. Very moving. Leibel wrote, and I won't read it for you, can read it yourself, about the emotional impact of returning a book to Israel during these times. And I think we're going to pass it over to Lynn.
So Emanuel Wertheimer was actually the first person that I researched. And I didn't find him on Ancestry or MyHeritage or Genie. But when I Googled his name, he came up because there is a regional information system for Baden-Württemberg, and there was a page there for Willi Wertheimer that noted that he was the son of Emmanuel, who was a teacher. And because Google picked that up, because Emmanuel was mentioned, I learned that Emmanuel had a son, Willie. Well, then it turned out that there is a Willie Wertheimer collection at the Leo Baeck Institute. And so I was able to learn a lot about Willie. He served in the German army during World War I. He was a cantor and religious school teacher in Germany, but immigrated to the United States with his wife and daughter in 1939. He then was a cantor at a number of Jewish congregations in Brooklyn. He served in the U.S. Army in World War II, and his life work was working toward German-Jewish reconciliation, and he also was active in planting trees in Israel in memory of Jewish fallen soldiers from World War I. So Willie Wertheimer was fairly well known. I found that he had a daughter, Ruth. When I tried to Google Ruth Wertheimer, Ruth Westheimer kept coming up. And this was even before Ruth Westheimer's passing. But I did find a picture that came up of Ruth Wertheimer. This is a picture of Willie Wertheimer's students in Germany, including his daughter Ruth at Hanukkah. The 1940 census shows that Ruth Wertheimer was 14 years old and living in Brooklyn with her father, Willie, and her mother, Jenny, Willie's wife. And I was kind of excited because I learned that they were living just really a few blocks away from where I live in Brooklyn now. I also found on public records that Ruth had married John Ottenheimer, who was a German Holocaust survivor in 1947. And when I Googled John Ottenheimer, who just died recently in 2021, I found his obituary, a detailed obituary in Newsday and also on Legacy. And the obituary listed 3 children, Alan, June, and Michael. And Michael's phone number was listed in the white pages. So I contacted Karen. I was very excited because, again, this was my first case. And she said, well, let's call Michael. And so we did. We phoned him. He is Emmanuel Wertheimer's great-grandson. He was delighted to hear about the book. I connected him with Leibel, and eventually the book was sent to Michael Ottenheimer. And this was one of the few ones where I was involved that was done over the telephone. Generally, because of the issues that Karen has talked about, I contact people via email, and in the email I provide a link to the article in the Leo Baeck newsletter about this project so that they can have some assurance that this is a legitimate project. So this is a more recent one that I worked on, Bela Chelnitz, who lived in Vienna and lived from 1863 to 1938. I found him on Genie, and learned that he had 3 children, 2 daughters and 1 son. And the son, Dr. Paul Adolf Telson, so he changed his name from Chelnitz, emigrated from Vienna to Memphis in the late 30s. And I learned on Genie that his daughter had married a Theodore Pollock, but the daughter's name was not listed. But there was a Melissa Pollock listed as their daughter and also site manager of the that profile. So Melissa Pollock is not a particularly unusual name, but she is Bella Chelnitz's great-granddaughter, and I found, by Googling her, I found an article in the Washington Post where she was interviewed about her work helping people to understand the fare machines in the metro system. And in that article, she explained that both of her parents, and they were named Theodore Pollock and Eva Chelnitz Pollock, that they had been Holocaust refugees who had to adjust to a new life when they came to this country. And she imagined her parents' culture shock at having had to learn to navigate around their new surroundings. So I was able to find her and contacted her. She very happily confirmed her relationship to Bella Chelnitz. And so Leibel Rosenberg has been in contact with her and is arranging for the restitution.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And I would like to just tell you a little bit about one of the cases that Lynn and I worked on together. We were using the resources at the Center for Jewish History and the Genealogy Center outside the actual reading room where you're really not allowed to talk, but in the center, if some of you have been there before, where you're not, well, you really shouldn't be talking. And as we were getting all excited about this case, we were just cracking at the moment. We looked across at the researcher who was right near where we were sitting, and we said, "Excuse me, would you mind if we talked?" And she said, "No, no, no, of course not," Rachel Francisco said. And about 10 minutes into the conversation, she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Can I become a volunteer too? This is amazing." So moving right on, the case of David Mentheim that was presented to us, and we found first from his Yad Vashem testimony a little bit more about him. But when I looked at the name Mentheim, it rang a bell, and sure enough, there is a case study of Florence Mentheim. Her papers, the family papers, are both in the Leo Baeck Institute, and there is material at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, where the Calico Center is located. But within the Leo Baeck Institute, it was particularly interesting because just last year we had produced a podcast that part of a series called Exile about various refugees in the United States. And one of them who was featured was Florence Mentheim, who actually was a spying on these right-wing Nazi groups in the United States. And in the script for the podcast is a mention of David Mentheim, the very same person we were looking for. So our archivist, Michael Simonson, simply called up the descendants and notified them that the book was available to them. Now, another case is that of Martin Frankenberger. We were able to relatively easily find his descendants. And in fact, they said, "Is there someplace we would like to donate it? Can you recommend someplace?" And we'll get back to this case in just a few minutes. My very favorite case, I think, of all of them so far, it was a woman who owned a book. Her name was Marta Listman Teichner. She died shortly before the war began. We had some basic information. It was a Viennese family. And this was also relatively easy to identify the descendants. They were in several databases. She was listed on a tree in MyHeritage, and her 4 children were also listed. This was a really interesting family, and my favorite story was that of Kate Pan, because when looking her up on Ancestry, I saw that she had served in the American Army in the WACs, and I was really interested to know more about her. And sure enough, believe it or not, from a Find a Grave posting, there was an indication that she was buried, I think somewhere in here, that she was in the American Army also. And there was an article that was attached to the Find a Grave that gave her whole life history, her escape from the Nazis, her enlistments, and some of her army experiences. So not only were we doing a chain of possession, a family tree, but we were also really getting into the story of a very interesting family. And in doing a little bit of additional history, we discovered that she had actually signed up, enlisted very soon after the Women Army Corps was established. So one can only imagine her motivation in this amazing story. Now, if we had been smart, I could recreate the story, but I will tell it as it is. We might have looked at JewishGen in our Holocaust database to the USC Shoah Foundation survivor interviews, which are detailed and which actually list all of the family members in this Marta Teichner's family, including her children and then some of the next generation. And Kate Hahn is here along with her 3 siblings. I also could trace the descendants from Helmut Teichner's obituary in the Chicago Tribune. You could just take a look to listen. It's a really interesting family. We learned from one of the descendants how one of the brothers had assisted Jewish refugees over the Pyrenees by pretending that he was a ski instructor and actually had to use that ruse in order to save the group of people he was carrying to Spain from France. And when I looked to see who would be the easiest descendant to identify, to find on People Finders or whatever, I picked the most unusual name, and that would have been Martha Teichner. That sounded like, how many Martha Teichners could there be? So I found very easily Martha on Wikipedia, but there's good news and bad news. We were excited that she was a CBS News correspondent, and of course I'm thinking, I'm going to be on TV. This is a great story. But then there was a problem, which is, how do you just call up a TV news correspondent? Where do you get the email address? How do you know how to reach her? But I was able to do it very, very easily, because in the bottom of the paragraph, it says that she received her bachelor's degree in economics from Wellesley College. I'm a Wellesley College alum too. And the email addresses and contact information for all of the alums are available on the college website. So I contacted her practically immediately, and practically immediately she wrote me right back and was very interested in the books, and spent a few days later, several hours, telling me this extraordinary family story of her family. So she has now become most interested in the project. The book is on its way from Nuremberg to her. And when you see me on TV in a few weeks, just wait. Good luck to you. Now, another story I want to tell you is a very personal one, because when I was doing this work many years ago, and everyone starts at the top, at the A's, top of the list, I figured I'll start at the bottom. I bet no one's even looked at the bottom. And so I started at the bottom of the Z's, and sure enough, 2 or 3 names up, there was Alexander Zuntz. I knew the name. You can see my own family tree. This was done quite some years ago. My great-great-great-great-grandmother was a Zuntz. So I said, yeah, this is my family. And if you look at the next slide, here is the Genie listing for Alexander Zuntz. And he is the person who owned the book. So I wrote to Leibel and I said, I'm interested in this book. It's my family. And this is what the book looks like. And I know because I have the book right here, because I was a recipient. I was restituted the book of my relative, Alexander Zuntz. Next one. And this is a photo in my younger years of the receipt of this book. I actually went to Nuremberg to get the book back. And I have to say, it was a very meaningful experience. Now, we have found other famous people on the list, and we've only started with our work. It's not that we're looking for famous people, but again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the people who would have owned these books would have been quite intellectual, interesting people. So it's no surprise that we are looking for the descendants of the French Prime Minister Léon Blum, who, I hope I pronounced that right, who could be recipients of this restituted property, and the descendants of Gideon Hausner. This is cracked very soon, we hope, who was the chief prosecutor of the Eichmann trial, and his father was the owner of some books that are found in this collection, and Martha Teichner, as you already heard. Now, we had an idea, which we will be following through shortly. How do we help others understand the power of the return of restituted property in any form, whether it be a Monet or a Manet, or whether it be simply something that was owned by your great-grandparents. And one of the ways to do it is to simply hold that the most meaningful connection would be to actually hold a book that was restituted. And we decided at the Calico Center, the genealogy center that was open last year at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, that we're going to create an area within the center where you can come and hold the book, my book and other ones, like probably the Frankenberger book, where the donors are willing to allow others to have that physical sense of touching something that had been stolen by the Nazis and that was restituted. And we think that will enable some of the hundreds of thousands of students who come to the Museum of Jewish Heritage to get a real physical connection to a history. And also, of course, in this time of anti-Semitism, it is a living volume that attests to history and what went on in Europe. These are some of the volunteers who have already signed up to assist us. We looked especially and have been very happily working with volunteers in many countries in Europe, because even if there was a German family, or even if it was a Polish family, the descendants could be found today in Great Britain, in France, Germany, Spain, and so on and so forth. Next one. I have this joke. At the end of many of my lectures, if I say, I usually say, if there's anything we can do for you, ask my colleague. And in this case, I can say that realistically. If there's anything we can do for you, our person to turn to is Janet Eisenberg, who has created so much of this actual PowerPoint program, but also of the abilities for us to have you volunteer. It's really two levels, and Janet will talk about it. I think, Janet, I'll actually turn it over to you to talk about how you might participate both in looking for your own families and in helping us find others.
Happily, thank you. So first of all, when I stop sharing my screen, I will post a link, or just contact me at this email address, jbeisenberg@me.com, and I will be happy to send you the database in a PDF that you can look through. It's very helpful to look through all of the people who come from different cities and maybe see if you know the names. That's how Karen was able to identify some people right off the bat. You could also become, and that's something you could do on a one-time basis and be very helpful to us by just providing leads and information. If you want to become a volunteer on a more permanent basis and work on an ongoing basis, also email me. I'll have you fill out this little form, which I'll send you. And just so we understand the your areas of expertise and your years of genealogy research, so we know how much help you might need. And I will give you training and make sure that you're able to get off to a good start. So that's it from me, Karen.
Yeah, Avrami, shall we go back to you? And perhaps you might want to field some questions for us to answer about the project and the individual cases.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Sure.
And then I'll post.
Thank you. So there are some questions in the Q&A, and Janet, you are going to run this part.
I'm happy to, but give me a second to read some of them. If you have one that you can share that while I'm reading the rest.
Let's see.
One of the questions that I see is with regard to the names and locations of the printers of the book and books, and how valuable they are to the families of the printers themselves. And that information is available. Libel has done a great deal of work, so I'm happy to know that there is as much value in returning to the families of the book dealers or the printers as there might be to the descendants or relatives, heirs, and so on.
Okay, some of these are just comments or questions of a genealogical nature. So people are very familiar. I'm just, are there any manuscripts or only books? I believe it's only books, right, Karen?
I believe so.
And then post the contact information here, yes. So I'm going to post my email. Hold on, let me figure out, oh, down there, okay. There's my email.
Just a comment that I've thought a lot about in the many years that I've been in this work is, you know, I think the reason this is so important is because we all know when we read in the news, again, about the Monets and Manets, but in thinking about all the books, all the household objects, and all of these various things that had been owned by our ancestors, not by the great art collectors, what happened to them? What happened to the rest of the stuff? And it's the Judaica, the menorahs, not the Rothschild menorahs, but just the little one that Bubby had, you know, and they are gone. So this is one of the few opportunities that something individual that belonged to an ancestor, to a regular person, not an art dealer, might be able to be returned. And that's what makes it so special.
Okay, now I'm about to post the link. Let me give you a word of warning about this link. Download it from the original format instead of opening it in Google Docs, and it will come out on a single page. If you open it into Google Docs, it transitions into a Word document, and you don't want that. You want to see it as an Excel spreadsheet. So just download it and then open it correctly right away. Now, we've been asked a few more questions here.
Yeah, and I can also comment that one of our colleagues who is listening today is Julie Martha Cohen, who from Amsterdam, who is a curator and has written extensively on this topic. And with regard to a question about resources for books and so on, she might be able to answer these questions for us. We have several colleagues in the field who are participating today, and thanks to all of you.
Are these secular books or religious works? They're both.
They're everything. Some are school books, children's books, secular books like the Tennyson book of poetry, and some are Hebrew books as well. Surprisingly wide variety. By the way, this is just something I heard from a colleague, but I can't verify it or haven't seen anything to verify it, which is why Julius Streicher would have collected all of these specific books. And one of the reasons might have been that in his anti-Semitic journal Der Stürmer, they didn't know that much about Jews, and they wanted to know more so that they could spin their diatribe against Jews. And so therefore these books offered them some information about what Judaism was all about in Jewish life. If there was a question, can we see the database even though if we're not available to volunteer? So, and Janet, could you answer that one again?
Sure. So I just posted it. If you scroll up a little bit, you'll see the hot link to the database. Just download it straight from the first view. Don't click into view as Google Doc, and then you'll be able to see the whole database on a single page. You can zoom in, you can scroll around, and you can see all the names and all the cities that they came from.
And as a small caveat, I mean, we've been so lucky as to have returned some of these books already and anticipate returning some soon. So if you see a book on the list or a name on the list, there's no guarantee that that book might be available in the future. So yeah.
Yes, and all of you who from Germany, from Amsterdam, from Italy, if you want to volunteer to help us with people perhaps that are descendants in your area, just really contact me. My email has been posted a couple of times, or you can, I think if you search, well, you know what? I think my name is also in the Jewish Gen database. You can contact me through there as well.
I just, since we have a few extra minutes, I'd like to tell you a story. I wasn't sure I'd have time to talk about, but it was a very meaningful moment in a case that I did a few years ago. The name, as you may have seen when I passed by, was book owner was Walter Gerst. And I knew the name because I'd worked with the Lehman family in bringing family members over, and they had brought over Walter Gerst's father from Europe. So I was able to identify and locate a daughter of Walter Gerst and spoke to her on the telephone. And she said she knew so the book had, I'd spoken about her grandfather, and she said, I know nothing about my grandfather. My grandparents were divorced when my father was 1. He knows nothing about his father. You know, they never spoke about it. And I thought a moment and I said to her, did you know that your grandfather was in Buchenwald? And there was this silence on the other end. And here was an adult woman who hadn't known that her grandfather was in a camp. And what a sad and unexpected moment, simply from the process of attempting to return her father's book.
So there was one question, Karen, you might be able to answer. Somebody said Leibel is her cousin, and she wanted to know why he's not on the chat.
I think he had a previous appointment, but he will be watching this. I hope you will be in touch with him. He's a remarkable person that has earned all of our respect for his doggedness in pursuing this project for so many years and the many hours that he spends at his computer lovingly working to return these books.
Right. I had made a mistake. I was only sharing it with the host and panelists. It has now been shared with everyone, both the link and my email. And if there's any issue with the download, I can send you the file directly. If it's not being downloaded, it prints out correctly. Somebody wants to know if they're books from particular places. There's thank yous.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment about a wonderful email I received just today. A woman in Massachusetts who's 99 years old. Her name is Ilse Browner, and when she heard about this project, she offered her services to help us. So she will be our oldest volunteer, I think. And we're very grateful that she reached out to us as a result of this. Really wonderful.
Okay, the chat is not savable via cut and paste.
If they want to save the chat, they can copy and paste it before we go off.
Right. I will do it right now, actually, if I can get there. Yeah. Let's see if I can do that.
Okay.
Yep.
I'd like to thank you, Karen, Janet, and Lynn, not only for this very informative and detailed and enjoyable presentation, but also for all of your inspiring work. And it is a privilege for Jewish Gen to be able to be connected and part of this. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. A few points before we go. First, I'd like to thank everybody who contributed when registering for today's talk. We greatly appreciate your support. If you have not yet done so, I hope that you will please consider supporting our fall appeal. What we raise now will help set the tone for what we can do in 2025, and we are engaged in many different initiatives and many different projects, including what you just learned about today. We have a brand new donation page, which works on both your computer and your phone. I will take less than 30 seconds to make a contribution, which could have a tremendous impact. I'm going to post a link in the chat now for anybody who is interested to do so. Gifts of $100 or more qualify for premium features, and new for anybody who donates $136 or more, you can actually dedicate a day of research. That means that you can do something in honor or in memory of someone. A message will appear on the Jewish Gen site, and we will also send out an email to our entire list, letting people know which day has been dedicated and in honor of who. There will be a follow-up email a little later today, which will include a link to this recording, the database file that has been mentioned, a survey, contact information for our speakers, and also a registration link for next week's webinar, which will be given by Chaya Sarah Herman on the topic of U.S. immigration and naturalization records. Chaya Sarah is an expert Jewish genealogist for Jewish Gen and works here at the Calico Center at the museum. So thank you again to everyone who has joined us from around the world. As always, our thoughts and prayers are with our brothers and sisters in Israel, and we pray for only good things. Have a good day, and I hope to see you all next week.